On to the AFC East. We're going to start with the Buffalo Bills. Man, every offseason coming off of just a heartbreak, disappointment, couple point loss, usually to the Chiefs. And the question is, how do we get over the hump? How do we get over the hump if we're the Buffalo Bills? And it's an interesting spot because last year they did a little roster reset, right? It was a whole bunch of veterans that they moved on from, Mitch Morse and their safeties and Tre'Davious White, a lot of the core players of the early Josh Allen AFC East dominant run. They all moved on, replaced by a whole bunch of younger players. And the Bills didn't miss a beat, man. There was still a similar team, probably even better last year, still coming out with the same heartbreak, but it's a roster that got younger, reset things a little bit, showed that they could compete, and they remain, hate saying this, but a couple players away. You're never really a couple players away, but they're always going to be in the mix, right? And there's fewer, I think, fixes needed in Buffalo now than maybe there even were a year ago when they started to make these decisions to get younger and go with the youth movement.
Yeah, I think this is why it's tricky sometimes, self-scouting and evaluating where you are after any given season. Obviously, it feels like just the same old story again for Buffalo. Like, we came up just short again. We were just, same story. But I think if you adjust that for the expectations going into the season, you would conclude, actually, we overachieved this year. Like, if you go back not even a year, if you go back sort of, 9, 10 months or whatever it was, post-draft, post-free agency going into last season, there were a lot of people that did not expect Buffalo to be a legit contender. And then they came out of the gate looking, they came out of the gate hot, and they were much better than I think people expected them to be. And they were setting the pace for a lot of that season. That I think they overachieved last year. That was supposed to be something of a competitive rebuild, maybe a little bit better than a competitive rebuild because you've got Josh Allen, you've got a lot of bones in place. But I think they were expected to take a step back last season, not be a number one seed contender type of team, and just sort of get in all these new pieces and rebuild a couple of positions. And actually it ended up that they did that and were able to still be really good, which has meant that now they still have some pieces to fix, but they, I think, overachieved relative to what they should have done. It's not just, this is like, we've reached our ceiling, this can't get any better. It's like, no, you did some serious work to reinforce things last season, and now you have, I think, a couple of clear areas to address. And then, maybe if you underachieve again next year, maybe we can have that conversation.
Bills are over the cap by about 10 plus million at the moment. We know all that stuff gets restructured, but they might not have massive flexibility. They were one of the early teams discussed as far as Myles Garrett goes. Maybe they could find a way to make that happen. They do have an extra second rounder that, could come into play. I think it was from the Stephon Diggs trade. So that could be on the table. But when you look at the depth chart, Amari Cooper moves on as a free agent. They grabbed him for the half season. Kind of worked, not really though. I mean, it was good for a little bit. Didn't really make the impact I think maybe that they hoped. Mac Hollins a free agent, so receiver needs some help. Rasul Douglas, cornerback 2, or cornerback starter, essentially opposite Christian Benford, and then DeMar Hamlin, a free agent at safety. But there's not a whole lot of, say, listed starters that are massive holes for this team. Do they want to upgrade, add depth on the D-line like every other team? Yes. Maybe they want to get younger at linebacker or continue to get young at linebacker. There's a few spots there, future-proof the offensive line. But as we're saying, not a whole bunch of massive needs, but some important ones when we talk about a starting corner, what they want to do at receiver, and then the depth on the D-line.
Yeah, I think they have those sort of 2 or 3 easy spots that they definitely need to figure out an answer for. Look, the last season, the big story going into the year, given what they did with Keon Coleman in the draft, was do they have an ex-wide receiver to replace Stephon Diggs? And if not, does it work without one? Well, they didn't really have one, and it worked most of the time without one, but I think there were times where that showed up as a problem, and they need a solution for that this offseason. Like, you can't go into the season again with no clear, recognized ex-receiver type of talent on this roster. I think they recognized that when they made the trade for Amari Cooper, they needed somebody that they could trust to win in those situations, and they never really had one. So figure out an answer at X wide receiver this offseason. Defensive line, like Gregory Rousseau is really good. Ed Oliver is good. That's basically it. I mean, Von Miller flashed at times last season, but hasn't made the impact that they would have hoped when they brought him over. they need more impact on that defensive line, which impacts the secondary. And the secondary, I think, is the last spot which needs some upgrades.
All right, so let me go back to the X receiver thing for a bit. I don't know if there's a good option. Like, what are the options for a true X receiver other than kind of hoping Keon Coleman, who showed some good flashes in year one, kind of hoping that he develops? I don't know if they have a
But
ton
he's
of
just not
options.
that type of player.
I get what he's not, but they thought that he was. He wasn't. Was he completely not that in year one? Can he? Do you have any more faith that he could do that after seeing him as a rookie with Josh Allen?
No, I mean, everything that he did well last season was all of in the category of things we expect Keon Coleman to do well, not in the category of, oh, what if he actually develops in this area? He can become our X receiver. It was like he won some contested catches, and outside of that, it was other non-X receiver things. Like they don't have anybody they can put on the outside against single coverage who can win down the sideline. That's the missing skill set in this offense.
All right, so the chat is suggesting Devontae Adams. We haven't mentioned Adams a ton as an option here. Certainly going to be moving on from the Jets. Of course, that's a division rival and all, but could that be a play? Because there's not a whole lot of, hey, go win one-on-one on the outside type of receivers available, especially once T. Higgins gets locked up by the Bengals. Is Devontae Adams potentially that guy to pair with Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and the tight ends here?
I mean, maybe it's an option, but you're talking about the Jets needing to play ball for that to be a likely option. Or them
we'll get to the Jets in a
it.
minute. I mean, if Mike T actually hired me for the Jets, I'm probably like you probably have to punt on this year if you're the Jets. And so helping the Bills in the short term, I don't know that really comes into play if you're the Jets needing to think long term. If I'm the Jets, I'm thinking 2026. We'll talk about them in about 30 minutes here.
I mean, I still think you don't want to help your division rival, regardless of whether it's. I mean, there will be other teams that are interested.
He's a cut candidate, trade candidate. Yeah, he's both. But anyway, that's one of the few options. Are there any other options at X?
I mean, a guy like Marquise Brown, his entire season for Kansas City was basically a write-off. Got hurt, just about made it back for the end of the season, but effectively they didn't get to see what that was supposed to be. And I think that was supposed to answer a similar question within the Chiefs receiving core. You thought you had Rashee Rice as your kind of volume slot guy. You thought you had Xavier Worthy as the rookie speedster, and then Marquise Brown, I think, was supposed to be the X that could win on the outside, and he gets hurt almost immediately. You basically never got to see what that offense was supposed to look like with that collection of talent. I mean, tough shit for the Chiefs, but for the Bills, it might be, maybe they can go to the same well and say, all right, Marquise Brown, somebody that a former first round pick who's generally underwhelmed in his career, but theoretically this is his role.
I love that option, by the way. I can't remember if I put him down in my notes or maybe for someone else, but I love the Marquise Brown option potentially for the Bills. Because remember, we said they felt like they were calibrated for the new NFL, bunch of slot receivers, bunch of yak heavy type of guys. Let's get a deep threat here again for Josh Allen, because obviously we know he can stretch the field. I like Marquise Brown as a compliment here. Potentially, I like Devontae Adams also as an option. The other part that I think might play out pretty well for the Bills, picking late first, that same group of corners that I think, the Benjamin Morrisons, Javon Ravel, throw Jedi Barron in there from Texas. I think all of those guys would be good fits in the late first, and fit a need and value, I think, there for the Bills. I think that might play out pretty well for them to take a shot on one of the injured corners, or at least a good late first, early second round type of corner. And I also think a lot of the D-line options in the second round would also match well with where the Bills are picking.
A ton of people are matching them up with defensive tackles as well at the bottom of that first round. Kenneth Grant, I know I gave him to Dallas at 12, but Kenneth Grant is somebody that like everyone wants to see him drop to Buffalo. At least Bills fans do, I think, as a guy to pair next to Ed Oliver. But I think there's a couple of defensive tackles that are being talked about at that spot as well. So yeah, defensive tackle, cornerback, like that bottom of the first round pick, I think will be a pretty good spot to address at least one of these significant needs.
Yeah, and remember, they have, as I said earlier, 2 second round picks. So if they want to get into the Myles Garrett thing, they'd have to do a whole lot of cap manipulation and restructuring, and figure out how they would make that work. Maybe they have the extra 2 to do that. But if they're not even going to do that, they have pick 30, but also 56 and 62, pretty close there in the second round.
The Garrett thing feels like a move that, like, that's the panic move, right? Like if the Bills get into the Myles Garrett sweepstakes and try and make that trade happen this offseason, that feels like they have looked at this season. Their analysis has been same old thing, right? Same ceiling we ran into. This is what we need to do, something fundamentally different. We need to shake it up. We need to disrupt the status quo, do something crazy, and go get a Myles Garrett. I feel like that's the wrong conclusion to draw from the season that they just had, based off, again, the expectations for them heading into the season. I think that would be extremely reactionary and not necessarily smart. So I think you look at that and you say, minimum we achieved expectations. Actually, we probably overachieved expectations. So now let's figure out where we get an X receiver from. Let's go get a defensive lineman that can make an impact, and let's go repair the secondary a bit. We can do all that without like mortgaging everything for Myles Garrett.
Mohall already mentioned, and where I was going to go with that, I do wonder how much the fact that they already made the Von Miller move a couple of years ago hurts them. The other name that I brought up was Khalil Mack. By the way, remember when Khalil Mack and Von Miller's careers were like perfectly paralleled? We were trying to rank them every year when we were working at PFF, and it was like, this guy's 7, this guy's 8 in the entire NFL. Like, they were always together. But Khalil Mack, I don't know what kind of market he's going to have. He could still play, man. And I don't know if that's like a 1 or 2 year, heavy deal or what it looks like, but that's a cheaper version of Myles Garrett for a guy that isn't Myles Garrett, but maybe can still play. And it would be fascinating to see Myles Garrett and Khalil Mack and Von Miller perhaps on the same team. But I do wonder if the Bills are gun shy at all going back down the veteran edge well, because the Von Miller thing hasn't really worked out.
Bring Mack back to Buffalo.
That's right. Buffalo legend, Khalil Mack.
I think it probably, I mean, yeah, so it was a less massive deal, but I do feel like the Von Miller deal to bring him in was it was the same family of ideas, right? Like, let's do something a little bit outside of the realms of what we know is sensible, hoping that it will pay off, right? That's what the Myles Garrett thing I think would be. It's like, I know this isn't a smart move, like it's not playing the percentages, but the payoff is big enough that it's worth the gamble, is effectively what that would be.
Man, I would love to see it. I would still love to see it. All right, man. Have we bottom line is, I think, play the cut game, right? The Devontae, if he gets cut, like, play in that world, at least inquire about Garrett, see if you could pull that off. I think so. There's a few of those power moves, but then there's also this like stay the course type of moves where I think the cornerback draft, the defensive tackle draft, I think those are going to line up to fit some of the Bills' needs, and just stay the course there as far as building through the draft. And if you use those 3 picks in the top 62, I think they have a chance to get 3 really good players that can make an impact just, already in year 1. Fixed?
Yep. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.